Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us now on the phone is the former Secretary of Defense under Presidents Ford and George W. Bush, Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. And Mr. Secretary, as always, it's good to have you with us on Newsmax TV.
Thank you.
Well, as you're aware, more than 100 people were killed in a violent crackdown on protesters by Egypt's military-backed government. The protesters were demanding the return of Mohamed Morsi as president. And meantime, Egypt's Vice President al-Baradei has resigned. What do you make of these developments?
Well, I think that the new Secretary of State, Mr. Kerry, has been dealt a difficult hand. The Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton Secretary of State handling of that earlier, it seemed to me, was not terribly skillful. The idea that you could have early elections and have anybody win other than the Muslim Brotherhood, which is not secular, as someone in the Obama administration had suggested, the Director of National Intelligence. It's not secular, it's Islamist. And because they're the best organized and the toughest and the most ruthless, they won the election and control of the parliament. And the effect has been that they've tried to impose a rule over the Egyptian people, which is not what the people who had demonstrated in Tahrir Square wanted. And as a result, there was a rejection of Mr. Morsi, who'd been elected. I think the critical relationship is between the United States and the Egyptian military, which has been developed over a period of decades now, thanks to Anwar Sadat many years ago, and that has been an anchor of stability in the country and in the region. And the military has a tough relationship now to manage this situation because the country's in turmoil. And the people feel that the United States favored the Muslim Brotherhood, and the people that we've sent there to deal with the problem have not done a particularly skillful job, in my view. I think it's unfortunate.
Mr. Secretary, in response to the crackdown today, White House Deputy Press Secretary Josh Earnest said that the U.S. strongly condemns the crackdown and will keep up the pressure on Egyptian leaders to begin a transition to democracy. How do you view the administration's response? And do you agree with those Republicans who say we need to cut aid from Egypt?
I don't know if they're Republicans or Democrats saying it. I heard people from both parties suggest that, and I think it would be a very serious mistake. We are dealing with countries that have different cultures, different languages, different neighbors, different circumstances, and they're not going to behave like we behave. We've got to recognize that and to work with them. Egypt is an enormously important country. It's one of the largest in that part of the world. It's the fountain of education for much of the Arab world. The people there don't have jobs. The young people don't. The instabilities have created a damage to their economy. And my view is that we ought to. We can't determine the outcome there, but we can play at the margins, so to speak, and we can be helpful and try to encourage a freer political system and a freer economic system and greater opportunity for the people there. I think that cutting off aid would be like severing our relationships with them and would be kind of a mindless act.
Mr. Secretary, is there a concern that this could spiral into a civil war within Egypt? And what impact does an unstable Egypt have on the Middle East, and particularly Israel?
Well, certainly it could spiral into a civil war. I mean, we see what's going on in Syria. There have been somewhere between 80 and 100,000 people dead in Syria in opposition to the Assad regime. It's conceivable that could happen in Egypt. Egypt has been, given its arrangement with Israel, has been a enormously positive, stabilizing influence in that part of the world. And good Lord willing, it can continue to be that way if in fact the countries in the neighborhood and the people in Egypt behave in a responsible way. And they're not going to end up looking like we do. They're not going to behave like we do. I mean, if you think of the United States, we went through a civil war. Women didn't vote into the 1900s. We weren't like, in our evolution, we were not like we are today. And to expect that we shouldn't deal with Egypt and should cut off aid unless they're exactly like we are is kind of an unrealistic, juvenile attitude.
Mr. Secretary, speaking of Israel, Iran continues moving apace with its nuclear program. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is prepared to do what it must to protect itself. Do you see Israel striking Iran?
I think it's useful in thinking about things like this to put yourself in the other person's shoes. If you were an Israeli prime minister or minister, and you had a country that's very small, with a population that's very small, and you heard every week what the Iranians say about eradicating and incinerating and eliminating the state of Israel, and then you watch their progress towards a nuclear weapon, I don't see how leadership in that country has any choice other than to defend the people of Israel.
And what about the State Department's recent closures of U.S. embassies across the Middle East and North Africa? Does this suggest that the Obama administration's claims of al-Qaeda's retreat and demise are premature? And in your view, is the administration's capturing of bin Laden, pulling troops out of the Middle East, and utilizing drone strikes a viable anti-terror strategy?
Well, no, I think that it's complicated. Clearly, you need to do more than simply use drones to kill people. It's helpful to gather information and intelligence by capturing people and finding out what it is they know so that we can protect the American people. I think that the administration has been uniformly desirous of de-emphasizing the threat from Islamists and suggesting that it is something that they can prevail over with bullets and drone strikes, which is not the case. This is much more like the Cold War. It's going to last decades, not years, and it is going to take perseverance and persistence on the part of the United States, and we have to be realistic, and the administration is not realistic about it. They're unwilling to even identify what the enemy is. They won't even use the word Islamist. They don't even acknowledge the fact that there are people being trained in madrasas in a number of countries to go out and kill innocent men, women, and children who are Americans. And unless you're willing to do that, it seems to me, you're not likely to prevail over the long term. You can't simply declare victory and come home. We have to have a strategy, and the administration has been sorely lacking in that.
Mr. Secretary, President Obama, as you know, has proposed reducing the American nuclear arsenal by as much as a third. There are reports he's prepared to do this unilaterally. What do you make of this?
Oh, I think it fits the approach that he's basically adopted. No one wants to have more nuclear weapons than are needed, but unilateral acts to reduce nuclear weapons do not make a more peaceful world. I think that working with the Russians to try to understand what might be a rational balance and the numbers that are appropriate for each side. It has been in the past, over successive administrations of both political parties, a reasonably rational way to approach it. Deciding you want to be more, quote, more peaceful than anyone else in the world, and therefore you're going to unilaterally disarm the United States, it seems to me is not a policy. It's an act of naivete.
And last question for you, Mr. Secretary. Today, the Pentagon announced same-sex spouse benefits for military couples. How do you view this?
I haven't had a chance to even be aware of what they've announced.
All right. Former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, as always, good to speak with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Okay, Kathleen.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.